If you've ever walked a hospital hallway after visiting hours, you know the building feels different, quieter, flatter, like the walls are waiting for something. Tonight, we're on the pediatrics floor, where small machines make big sounds and the simplest noises land harder than they should. A plush toy chirps in a sealed playroom, batteries removed the day before. A call light steps room to room down an empty alcove, like someone pacing just out of sight. A themed elevator opens to an unused play space with no badge activity anywhere near it, and an aquarium pump starts with a rhythm close enough to footsteps that staff wrote it down twice before checking the panel. Every moment tonight comes from real night rounds, console exports, controller logs, and handwritten notes. And one of the reports in this episode was almost pulled from the file entirely. You'll hear why when we get there. If you're new here, subscribe so you don't miss our daily true horror stories. Subscribe and hit the bell. We drop new horror stories every day. Don't forget to like the video and leave a comment with where you're watching from and the time. It helps us grow and bring new stories every single night. All right, let's get into it. I was the night nurse on the pediatric ward, overseeing the quiet hours. The hospital settled into a deep calm after midnight. The only sounds the distant hum of machinery. That particular night, a faint, distinct chirp came from the closed playroom. My shift began as usual, a little before 11. The ward was mostly dark, save for the soft glow from the nurses' station and the dimmers in the hallways. I made my initial rounds, checking on the sleeping children in their rooms and the parents resting on their cots in the family alcoves. The air was always kept cool, a steady temperature that felt crisp against the skin. My routine was a familiar rhythm of quiet footsteps, quick chart checks, and the occasional adjustment of a blanket. The glass-walled playroom, usually a vibrant space, was now a still, shadowed box at the end of the main corridor. Its door was always kept latched after visiting hours, a standard safety protocol. The only light inside came from the faint spill of the hallway and the emergency exit sign above the far door. The large fish tank in the hallway, a source of gentle light and sound during the day, was also dimmed, its filtration system a low, consistent hum. I had just returned to the nurses' station, settling in for a few minutes of charting. The ward was silent, the kind of deep quiet that amplifies every small sound. Then I heard it again. A soft, electronic chirp. 3 distinct pulses, coming from the playroom. It was the sound of a small, plush toy. One of the many interactive items we kept for the children. I knew that sound well. I paused, listening, but the silence returned, thick and unbroken. My first thought was that a child had somehow been left in the playroom, or perhaps a parent had gone in for something. But the door was latched, and I had just walked past it. I stood up, moving towards the playroom, my steps quiet on the linoleum. The playroom was empty, just as I expected. The toys were neatly arranged, the small tables and chairs pushed against the walls. I scanned the room, my eyes adjusting to the low light. Nothing seemed out of place. I walked around the perimeter, checking behind the large toy chest and under the small slide. There was no one there. I remembered the plush bird toy, a popular item that made a distinct chirping sound when squeezed. It was usually kept on a low shelf near the window. I located it, a small blue bird with large, embroidered eyes. I picked it up. It felt light, almost too light. I remembered a work order from yesterday. A maintenance request to remove the batteries from several toys. A child had been chewing on one, and we had decided to temporarily disable all battery-operated toys for safety. I turned the toy over. The small fabric tag, usually a discreet label, was now a bright yellow indicator. It read, "Batteries removed. Date, yesterday." I pressed the toy, squeezed it firmly. Nothing. It was inert, a simple plush item. I placed it back on the shelf, a faint unease beginning to settle. I returned to the nurse's station, the incident logged in my mind as a minor anomaly. Perhaps the sound had come from outside the ward, or my ears had played a trick in the quiet. A few minutes later, the call panel at the nurse's station flashed. It was a single, soft, amber light, indicating a call from one of the family sleep alcoves. Alcove 3. I checked the monitor. It showed no active patient in that alcove, only a parent cot. The alcoves were small, semi-private spaces for parents to rest, distinct from the patient rooms. I walked down the hall, past the fish tank, towards alcove 3. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open gently. The alcove was empty. The cot was neatly made, untouched. No one was there. The call button, a small white rectangle on the wall, was not illuminated. I pressed it, canceling the phantom call. This was unusual. Call buttons did not activate themselves. I made a mental note to check the system logs later. The night continued, punctuated by the rhythmic hum of the building. About an hour later, as I was documenting a patient's vitals, the call panel flashed again. This time, it was alcove 5, another empty family space. I repeated the process, finding the alcove empty and the button unpressed. A pattern was beginning to form, a series of minor, unexplainable events. I felt a prickle of something cold, not from the air but from the quiet implications. I decided to review the console exports from the nurse call system. The system logged every activation, every sensor trigger. I pulled up the data for the last few hours. The phantom calls from alcoves 3 and 5 were there, logged as momentary activations, then immediate deactivations. No one had been in those alcoves. Then I saw it. A motion sensor activation in the playroom. The passive infrared sensor, designed to detect movement, had triggered. The log showed it activated for a duration of about 3 seconds. And precisely at the same time, within a fraction of a second, the aquarium pump timer in the hallway had registered a brief power fluctuation. This was the same time I had heard the first chirp. The coincidence felt too precise. I reviewed the logs for the previous night. Nothing similar. This was new. I felt a growing sense of isolation, alone with these strange data points in the quiet hospital. I decided to conduct a more thorough check. I walked the entire ward again, slowly, deliberately. I checked every patient room, every supply closet with its motion-activated light, every closed exam room under its dimmer. Everything was secure. As I passed the playroom, I paused. The glass wall reflected the dim hallway lights. I could see the plush bird toy on its shelf. I felt a strange compulsion to check it again. I opened the door, stepped inside. The air was still, cool. I picked up the toy, still inert. I placed it back. As I turned to leave, I heard it again. 3 distinct chirps, faint, but unmistakable, coming from the toy. I froze. My hand was still on the doorknob. I looked at the toy. It sat there, motionless on the shelf. I had not touched it. I had not squeezed it. I walked back to it, picked it up, examined the tag again. Batteries removed. It was impossible. I stood in the empty playroom, the small blue bird in my hand, feeling the quiet dread settle deep within me. I checked the console exports again, focusing on the exact moment of the second set of chirps. The PIR sensor in the playroom had not triggered. No power fluctuations were logged. It was as if the sound had simply manifested. I felt a chill, a coldness that had nothing to do with the hospital's temperature controls. I considered calling security, but what would I report? A toy chirping without batteries? Phantom call buttons? There was no tangible threat, no evidence of intrusion, just a series of inexplicable events. I spent the rest of the night reviewing every system log I could access. The nurse call system, the motion sensor logs, the building management system for power fluctuations. I found another anomaly. The elevator, which serviced only our floor and the main lobby, had registered an unscheduled opening. It had opened directly onto our floor to an empty hallway, then closed again, all without a call from inside or outside. This happened twice, both times during the deepest part of the night. It was another data point, another system acting without apparent cause. I compiled a detailed report, documenting every incident, every log entry, every observation. I attached the console exports, highlighting the synchronized PIR and pump timer events. I described the battery-removed toy chirping. I noted the phantom call button activations and the elevator opening to an empty floor. I tried to keep my language as factual and procedural as possible, avoiding any hint of personal interpretation or fear. The report was filed, reviewed by the charge nurse and then by facilities management. Their investigation found no malfunctions in the nurse call system, no errors in the PIR sensors, and no issues with the elevator controls. The aquarium pump timer was checked and found to be operating within normal parameters. The work order for the battery removal from the toys was confirmed. There was no explanation. The incidents were logged as unresolved anomalies. The plush bird toy was eventually removed from the playroom, placed in a locked supply closet. The quiet dread, however, remained. It was a subtle, persistent feeling, a whisper in the back of my mind. I still hear it sometimes, that faint, three-pulse chirp in the deepest quiet of the night. It echoes in the silence, a sound without a source, a memory of something that simply should not have been. I was the charge nurse on the pediatric oncology floor. It was a quiet Tuesday night, well past midnight, with a faint hum from the building systems. The first call light appeared from an empty alcove. My station was central, a horseshoe desk facing the main hallway. From there, I could see the digital display of the nurse call panel, a grid of room numbers that usually remained dark during quiet hours. Most patients were asleep, their parents resting on pull-out cots beside them. The floor was dim, lit only by soft night lights and the glow from the fish tank hallway. I had just finished charting the last of my rounds, the air in the station feeling cool and still. The hospital's ventilation system provided a constant, low hum that was easy to forget. The call panel chimed softly, a sound that usually meant a child needed something or a parent had a question. This time, the indicator lit up for room 312, a family sleep alcove. It was one of the rooms designated for parents to rest when their child was in a procedure, and it had been empty for days. My routine on the night shift was a steady rhythm of checks and documentation. I would walk the long corridors, listening for any sounds, observing the subtle shifts in light from the closed exam rooms. The themed elevator, usually a source of cheerful noise during the day, stood silent and still. I would check the supply closet, its motion light flickering on as I entered, then off again as I left. The fish tank hallway, with its gentle blue glow, was a calming presence, the fish moving slowly in their tanks. I knew the floor plan intimately. Every room, every alcove, every sensor. The nurse call system was a critical component, designed for immediate response. Its logic was simple. A button pressed, a light illuminated, a chime sounded. There was no ambiguity in its function. The system was robust, designed for constant use and minimal error. We relied on it completely. The light for room 312 remained steady on the panel. I waited a moment, thinking it might be a transient fault, a brief static burst. It did not clear. I stood up, my shoes making a soft sound on the linoleum. The hallway was empty, the silence deep. I walked towards the alcove, my steps measured. The door to room 312 was slightly ajar, as I had left it after my last check. I pushed it open fully. The room was dark, the cot neatly folded, the air still and cool. No one was there. I checked the pull cord in the bathroom, the call button by the bed. Neither had been activated. I pressed the reset button on the wall panel inside the room. The light on my central console extinguished. I returned to the station, a slight unease settling in. It was an anomaly, nothing more. A few minutes later, the chime sounded again. This time, the light for room 314 illuminated. This was the adjacent alcove, also empty. I felt a prickle of something colder than the night air. I walked back, the hallway stretching out before me. Room 314 was also dark and empty. I reset the panel. As I turned to leave, the light for room 316 came on. It was a sequential progression. My breath caught. I stood in the doorway of 314, looking at the panel for 316, which was now lit. I did not move. The panel for 318 then lit up. The calls were advancing, room by room, down the empty alcove corridor. There was no sound of footsteps, no whisper of movement, only the soft chime and the rising LEDs. I walked quickly back to the central station. The console display showed the active calls, a line of illuminated numbers. 312, 314, 316, 318. Each one had registered as a pull station activated event. I watched as 320 then lit up, followed by 322. The sequence continued, moving steadily through the unoccupied rooms. My hand hovered over the phone to call maintenance, but I hesitated. I needed more information, something concrete for the report. I accessed the system's logbook, pulling up the event history. The entries were precise. Time, room number, activation type. Each entry confirmed a pull station activation. The system was reporting exactly what it was designed to report. The problem was the absence of a physical trigger. I decided to observe the pattern from the central station. The calls continued to advance, reaching the end of the alcove corridor. Then, after a brief pause, the sequence began again, starting with 312. It was a loop. The soft chimes were relentless, a quiet, insistent presence in the deep night. I reviewed the architectural wiring diagrams for the nurse call system. Each pull station was wired in series, connected to the central console. A fault in one could potentially cascade, but a sequential, looping activation was highly unusual. It suggested a systemic issue, not a random short. I noted the exact times of each activation, creating a precise log of the phantom calls. The pattern was too perfect to be random. I contacted the overnight maintenance supervisor. His voice was groggy, but he listened patiently as I described the situation. He agreed it was strange. He arrived about 20 minutes later, carrying a toolbox and a diagnostic tablet. We walked the alcove corridor together. The calls were still advancing, the lights on the wall panels illuminating as we approached each room. We entered room 312. The supervisor checked the wiring behind the wall panel, using his tablet to run diagnostics. The system reported no faults. He moved to 314, then 316. Each room showed normal function. There was no visible damage, no loose connections. The cold air in the rooms felt heavy. We returned to the central station. The supervisor connected his tablet to the main nurse call console. He pulled up the raw data, a stream of information detailing every system event. He focused on the call plate walkdown, the sequential activations. He then cross-referenced it with the wiring diagram. After a few minutes of silent analysis, he pointed to a specific junction box on the diagram, located near room 312. He explained that a single miswired pull station, if it had a specific type of internal short, could potentially send a signal that mimicked a series of activations down the line. It was a rare fault, he said, but not impossible. The system was interpreting a single, continuous fault as multiple, distinct activations due to the way the circuit was designed. He theorized that the miswiring was causing a constant, low-level signal which the system then processed as a series of sequential trips based on the topology of the wiring. The system was essentially walking the signal down the line, interpreting the continuous fault as discrete events. We went back to room 312. The supervisor opened the wall panel again, this time with a more focused approach. He found a subtle anomaly in the wiring, a connection that was slightly out of place, almost imperceptible. It was not a complete short, but enough to create the phantom signal. He made a small adjustment, a reseating of a wire. The call panel at the central station immediately went dark. The chimes stopped. The silence that followed was profound, almost deafening after the relentless soft sounds. The supervisor ran a full system diagnostic, all clear. He then tested the pull station in room 312. It functioned normally. He checked the other rooms in the alcove, all normal. He filed a detailed report noting the specific wiring anomaly and the resolution. I added my own observations to the logbook, detailing the sequential nature of the calls and the absence of any physical presence. The incident was officially closed as a technical fault, a rare wiring issue. The console export, a CSV file of the event data, served as the primary evidence. It showed a clear pattern of sequential trips, confirming the topological nature of the fault. The rest of the night passed without incident. The floor remained quiet, the hum of the building systems a familiar comfort. I still felt a lingering unease, a quiet dread that had settled deep. The idea of a system operating autonomously, mimicking human action without any human input, was unsettling. It was a procedural fault, a logical error in the machine, but it had felt like something more in the deep isolation of the night. I still hear the soft chimes sometimes, even when the floor is completely silent. It is a phantom sound, a memory of the lights advancing down an empty corridor. The quiet dread of that night remains, a subtle whisper in the back of my mind. I was performing a routine systems check late one night. The hospital was mostly quiet, the air cool and still. That was when the service elevator unexpectedly arrived at the pediatrics floor. My job as a facilities technician involved constant monitoring of the hospital's infrastructure. This particular night, I was overseeing a scheduled generator test sequence. The test required a brief, controlled power sag to ensure seamless transfer to emergency power. I was in the main control room, watching the readouts, when the elevator controller log flagged an anomaly. It showed the service elevator, which I had sent to the basement for a parts retrieval, had made an unscheduled stop. The log indicated it had opened its doors on the pediatrics level before returning to its programmed destination. This was unusual. The pediatrics floor was largely empty during these late hours, and no one should have been calling the service car. My routine typically involved checking HVAC systems, monitoring power grids, and responding to minor equipment failures. The hospital at night was a different entity from its daytime bustle. Corridors stretched long and silent, lit by dimmers. The only sounds were the distant hum of machinery and the occasional soft chime of a nurse call system. Pediatrics, in particular, had a unique quietness after visiting hours. The themed elevator, usually a source of delight for children, stood idle. Family sleep alcoves were dark, and the exam rooms were closed. My presence was usually confined to the mechanical rooms or the main server racks, far from patient areas. I decided to investigate the elevator anomaly directly. I took a different service elevator up to the pediatrics floor. The doors opened to a long, quiet hallway. The air here felt a little cooler than the rest of the building. To my left was the large glass wall of the playroom. The space beyond was dark, save for the ambient light filtering in from the hallway. I stepped out, my boots making soft, almost imperceptible sounds on the polished linoleum. The only sound was the low hum of the building's ventilation system. I walked towards the playroom, my flashlight being cutting through the dimness. As I approached the glass wall, a faint, high-pitched chirping sound reached me. It was the sound of a child's toy, the kind that makes a brief, electronic melody when activated. The sound came from inside the playroom. I stopped, listening. The chirping repeated, then faded. I knew the policy. All toys were supposed to have their batteries removed during quiet hours to prevent disturbances. I checked the badge log for the pediatrics floor. No entries for the last several hours. No one had swiped in or out. The only activity recorded was the service elevator's brief stop. I tried the door to the playroom. It was locked, as expected. I used my master key to enter. The air inside was noticeably colder. The chirping sound came again, this time from a corner near a small plastic kitchen set. I walked over, my flashlight beam sweeping the area. There was a small, plastic toy phone on the floor. It chirped once more as I approached, then fell silent. I picked it up. The battery compartment was empty. I checked another toy, a small robot. It too chirped faintly, then went quiet. Its battery compartment was also empty. This was not possible. These toys should not have been making any sound. I moved deeper into the playroom. The themed elevator, the one that had stopped here, was on the far side of the room, its doors closed. I walked towards it, my gaze sweeping the empty space. There were no signs of forced entry, no disturbed items. The room was meticulously clean, just as the night staff would have left it. As I neared the elevator, I heard a soft click. It was the sound of a call button activating. I looked at the elevator panel. The button for the basement level was lit, then extinguished. It was as if someone had pressed it. I stood there for a few moments, listening to the silence. The hum of the building was the only constant. I exited the playroom, locking the door behind me. The hallway felt even colder now. I walked past the fish tank hallway, the dim light from the tanks casting a faint, watery glow. The fish moved slowly, their movements almost hypnotic. I continued towards the nurse's station, where the central call panel was located. The panel showed no active calls from the pediatrics floor. Everything appeared normal, yet the toys and the elevator button contradicted that. I felt a quiet unease settling in. This was not a simple system glitch. I returned to the main control room and pulled the detailed log from the elevator controller. The export confirmed the brief power sag during the generator test sequence. It also showed the elevator's door recycle event on the pediatrics floor. The system registered the doors opening for about 10 seconds, then closing, before the car continued its original journey to the basement. There was no record of a call button being pressed from inside the car, nor from the floor itself. The system simply registered the doors opening. I cross-referenced this with the badge access logs. Still nothing. No one had entered the pediatrics wing for hours. I then reviewed the overnight rounding notes from the nursing staff. Their reports confirmed the floor was quiet and secure. No unusual activity was logged. I checked the motion sensors in the playroom and the adjacent supply closet. The logs showed no activation during the time the elevator doors were open, or at any point during the night. This was a critical piece of evidence. If someone had been in the playroom, the motion sensors would have triggered. The only explanation remaining was a system anomaly, a phantom event triggered by the power fluctuation. But the toys, the call button, these were not electronic signals. I filed a detailed report, attaching the controller export and the generator test sheet. The official conclusion attributed the elevator's unscheduled stop and door cycle to the brief power sag. It was categorized as a minor system anomaly, a rare occurrence during generator testing. The chirping toys and the activated call button were noted as unexplained, possibly a residual effect of the power fluctuation on sensitive electronics, even those without batteries. The file was closed. The incident was logged and filed away. I still think about that night sometimes. The quiet hum of the building, the cold air in the playroom, the faint chirping of the battery-removed toys. I remember the basement call button lighting up, then fading, in an empty room. It was just a system anomaly, the report said. I still hear it sometimes, that faint, high-pitched sound, in the quietest parts of the hospital at night. I was on my routine overnight security rounds, checking the pediatric wing. It was late autumn, and the air inside the hospital felt cool and still, a stark contrast to the sharp frost forming outside. That night, a faint rhythmic tapping sound began to register in the long, quiet hallway leading to the family sleep alcoves. My job involved maintaining the security and calm of the facility during the quiet hours. This meant regular patrols, checking door locks, ensuring no unauthorized access, and responding to any unusual activity. The hospital was a large, modern structure, designed with patient comfort in mind, which included a long hallway featuring a large built-in aquarium. This aquarium was a central feature, intended to soothe children and parents alike. My rounds typically took about an hour to complete a full circuit of the wing, moving through dimly lit corridors and past closed exam rooms, all under the watchful glow of motion-activated lights. The hum of the building's systems was a constant, low presence, a familiar backdrop to the isolation of the night shift. The tapping sound was subtle at first, barely audible above the general hum of the building. It seemed to emanate from the vicinity of the large fish tank, a long glass-fronted structure set into the wall. I paused my patrol, listening intently. The sound was distinct, a light, repetitive tap, 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 almost like small, deliberate footsteps. It was too regular to be random. I checked the hallway, scanning the floor and ceiling. No one was present. The hallway was empty, the family sleep alcoves beyond it dark and silent. I walked the length of the corridor, past the themed elevator, and into the playroom with its glass wall, then back again. The sound persisted, always seeming to come from the same general area near the aquarium. I made a mental note to check it again on my next pass. About an hour later, on my subsequent round, the tapping was still there. It had not changed in rhythm or intensity. I approached the aquarium slowly, my footsteps muffled by the carpet. The tank itself was a vibrant display of marine life, softly lit, casting a gentle glow on the polished floor. The water within was crystal clear, and the filtration system produced a low, steady hum. I placed my hand against the glass, feeling the cool surface. The tapping seemed to resonate from within the wall behind the tank, or perhaps from the cabinet directly beneath it. I knelt, examining the base of the cabinet. It was a solid, built-in unit, designed to house the aquarium's pumps and filtration equipment. There were no visible gaps or loose panels. The sound was consistent, a steady tap, tap, tap. About one tap every 2 seconds, then a pause, then it would resume. It felt like something was moving or vibrating against a hard surface. The cold air from the vents nearby did not seem to affect it. I pulled out my flashlight, sweeping the beam across the floor and the lower sections of the wall. There was nothing out of place. No debris, no signs of anything having fallen or shifted. The sound was unnerving in the quiet of the night. It suggested a presence, even though I knew the area was secured. The implication of small, unseen steps was difficult to shake. I spent a few minutes just observing, trying to pinpoint the exact source. It was frustratingly diffuse, seeming to come from the entire cabinet area. I considered the possibility of a loose pipe or a faulty motor, but the rhythm was too precise, too much like a deliberate action. I logged the observation in my digital report, noting the time and location, describing the sound as a faint, rhythmic tapping, consistent with light footfalls. The next night, the tapping returned. It began shortly after midnight, just as I was making my first full round of the pediatric wing. The sound was identical to the previous night. The same steady tap, 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 emanating from the fish tank hallway. I decided to investigate more thoroughly. I retrieved a contact microphone and a sound pressure level meter from the security office. The hallway was still and dark, save for the soft glow of the aquarium. The air was cool, carrying the faint, clean scent of hospital disinfectant. I attached the contact mic to various points on the aquarium cabinet, starting with the main access panel. The mic immediately picked up the distinct tapping, amplifying it through my headphones. It was clear, mechanical, and undeniably rhythmic. I then used the SPL meter to measure the ambient noise levels in the hallway. The background hum was consistent, around 35 decibels. The tapping, when isolated by the contact mic, registered as a sharp, percussive event, distinct from the general machinery noise. I began to systematically move the contact mic, pressing it against different sections of the cabinet. The sound was strongest when the mic was placed directly over the area housing the main water pump. I could feel a subtle vibration through the cabinet material. I noted the exact timing of the taps, using my watch. The pattern was a series of about 3 to 5 taps, then a brief pause, then another series. This cycle repeated consistently. I cross-referenced my observations with the hospital's maintenance logbook. There was a scheduled daily maintenance cycle for the aquarium's filtration system, which included the main water pump. The pump was programmed to run in intervals, cycling on and off to maintain water quality and oxygenation. The timing of these cycles, according to the logbook, perfectly aligned with the periods when I was hearing the tapping. This was a significant piece of evidence. The pump, when it started its cycle, was generating the sound. I theorized that the pump's internal mechanism, or perhaps a loose component, was vibrating against the inside of the cabinet, creating the percussive effect. The material of the cabinet, likely a dense composite, was acting as a soundboard, amplifying the vibrations into the hallway. I documented my findings in a detailed report, including the audio capture from the contact mic and the correlation with the maintenance schedule. I submitted a maintenance ticket, requesting an inspection of the aquarium pump and the installation of vibration isolation pads. The next day, the maintenance team responded. They confirmed that the main pump was indeed vibrating more than usual during its startup phase. They installed specialized rubber isolation pads beneath the pump and along the interior surfaces of the cabinet where the pump was housed. The goal was to absorb the vibrations before they could transfer to the cabinet structure. That night, I returned to the pediatric wing for my shift. The air was still cold, and a light fog had settled outside the hospital windows. I made my rounds, approaching the fish tank hallway with a sense of anticipation. The hallway was quiet, the aquarium glowing softly. I paused, listening intently. There was only the familiar low hum of the filtration system. The rhythmic tapping was gone. I walked the length of the corridor, stood by the cabinet, and listened again. Nothing. The quiet dread that had accompanied those small, phantom footsteps had dissipated. The procedural investigation had yielded a clear mechanical explanation. The incident was officially closed in the security file. The maintenance report confirmed the pump issue and the successful installation of the isolation pads. The logbook entries from my shifts simply noted, "No unusual activity" in the pediatric wing. The sound had been a simple mechanical vibration, amplified and given a misleading rhythm by its enclosure. Yet, even with the logical explanation and the physical evidence, the memory of those quiet, rhythmic taps in the silent, isolated hallway still occasionally surfaces. I sometimes hear it in the deep quiet of a long night, a faint echo in the back of my mind, a reminder of how easily a familiar sound can become something else entirely. I was the night shift registered nurse, covering the pediatric floor. The air in the hospital was always cool, a constant, regulated temperature maintained through the long hours. A subtle, almost imperceptible hum from the building's systems was the only consistent sound. My shift began as usual, just after the last of the evening visitors had departed. The hospital settled into its quiet rhythm, a different entity entirely from its daytime bustle. The long corridors, usually filled with footsteps and conversation, became still and reflective under the dim night lights. The pediatric wing, in particular, took on a hushed quality, a respectful silence for the sleeping children. My routine involved regular rounds, checking on patients, administering medications, and ensuring the general order of the unit. The nurses' station served as my central command, a brightly lit island in the quiet expanse. From there, I could monitor the central call panel, review patient charts, and keep an eye on the hallway through the glass partition. The unit was designed with family comfort in mind, including several small sleep alcoves adjacent to patient rooms. These alcoves were equipped with a parent cot, a simple folding bed for overnight stays. The night was clear outside, with a faint frost visible on the windows of the playroom's glass wall. Inside, the air remained steady, a controlled environment. The only movement was my own, or the occasional slow sweep of the themed elevator doors opening to an empty playroom. The fish tank hallway, usually a vibrant distraction for children, now glowed with a soft internal light, the fish moving in slow, deliberate patterns behind the glass. The hospital's building management system, or BMS, was a silent partner in my work. It monitored everything from air pressure to light levels, a constant digital watch over the facility. I often consulted its logs for environmental anomalies or to track the performance of various systems. It was a tool for maintaining comfort and safety, a procedural backbone for the building's operations. The incident began a little past midnight. I was at the nurses' station, completing some charting. The floor was quiet, most patients and their families asleep. The only sounds were the soft click of my keyboard and the distant, rhythmic hum of the HVAC system. I had just finished my rounds on the east wing, confirming all patient rooms were secure and quiet. My attention was drawn by a subtle sound, a faint rustle that seemed to come from the direction of the family sleep alcoves. It was not loud, barely more than a whisper, but distinct in the pervasive stillness. I paused, listening, but the sound did not repeat. I attributed it to the building settling, or perhaps a minor air current. The hospital was an old structure, despite its modern systems. A few minutes later, the sound came again. This time, it was clearer. A distinct fabric scrape, followed by a soft thud. It was the sound of something shifting, something heavier than a sheet. I looked up from my screen, scanning the hallway. The alcoves were out of my direct line of sight from the station, tucked into recesses along the corridor. I decided to investigate. I stood up, the floorboards creaking softly under my weight. The hallway was empty, the dim nightlights casting long, soft shadows. I walked slowly towards the alcoves, my rubber-soled shoes making no sound on the polished linoleum. The air felt cool, but not unusually so. As I approached the first alcove, I could see the parent cot. It was a standard issue, a metal frame with a canvas sleeping surface, folded neatly and stored upright against the wall. This particular alcove was empty. The patient in the adjacent room had been discharged earlier that day. The cot should have been undisturbed. What I saw was subtle but undeniable. The cot was no longer flush against the wall. It had shifted, leaning slightly forward, its top edge angled away from the plaster. One of its folded legs, previously tucked securely, had partially extended, causing the slight tilt. It looked as if someone had nudged it, or perhaps attempted to unfold it and then stopped. I reached out and gently pushed the cot back into its proper position. The metal scraped faintly against the floor, and the canvas rustled. It felt solid, not loose or unstable. I checked the other cots in the nearby alcoves. They were all neatly folded and flush against their respective walls. I made a mental note to check the housekeeping log for any recent activity in that alcove. It was possible a cleaner had moved it and not fully secured it, though that was uncommon. I returned to the nurse's station, a slight unease lingering. The incident was minor, easily explainable. Yet, the quiet of the hospital amplified its strangeness. I continued with my charting, but my attention was now more attuned to the ambient sounds. The hum of the building seemed more pronounced, the silence between its pulses more profound. About an hour later, the central call panel at the nurse's station registered an alert. It was a patient call from a room on the far end of the unit, a room that had been empty for a few days following a discharge. The panel displayed the room number, but no associated patient name. I stared at the screen for a moment, a cold sensation spreading through me. Empty rooms did not generate call alerts. I checked the system logs for that room. There was no record of a call button being pressed, only the system registering an activation. This was unusual. Call buttons were hardwired, designed for direct patient use. A phantom activation was rare, almost unheard of without a physical press. I decided to investigate immediately. I walked down the long corridor towards the empty room. The themed elevator doors were closed, reflecting my own image in their polished surface. The fish tank hallway was still, the water gently circulating. The air felt a little sharper in this section of the unit. I approached the room cautiously, my hand on the door handle. The door was slightly ajar, as I had left it after my last check. Inside, the room was dark, save for the dim light filtering in from the hallway. The bed was stripped, the furniture neatly arranged. The call button, a small white rectangle on the wall beside the bed, was not illuminated. There was no sign of disturbance. I checked the bathroom, the closet, even under the bed. Nothing. The room was empty. I returned to the nurse's station, feeling a growing sense of isolation. The call panel incident, combined with the shifting cot, felt like more than coincidence. I decided to review the BMS logs for the entire unit, focusing on environmental changes around the time of the cot incident. The BMS recorded air pressure, temperature, and airflow data from various sensors throughout the building. I pulled up the controller trend data for the section of the unit where the alcove was located. The graphs displayed a steady line for temperature and humidity. However, the air pressure delta showed a subtle fluctuation. Around the time I heard the fabric scrape and thud, there was a brief, localized dip in pressure, followed by a rapid return to baseline. The change was minimal, but it was there, a blip in the otherwise smooth data. I cross-referenced this with the HVAC system's operational logs. The return air damper for that specific zone had cycled open and closed around the same time. This was part of its normal operation, but the timing was precise. A sudden opening of a damper could create a brief localized suction, a faint whoosh of air. It was plausible that this sudden air movement, however slight, could have pulled at the canvas of the folded cot, causing it to shift and partially extend a leg. The fabric, scrape and thud, would be the sound of the cot moving against the wall and the floor. The explanation was procedural, grounded in the mechanics of the building. The BMS logs provided the evidence. The pressure delta matched the rustle. The faint whoosh of air was the damper cycling. The cot had moved due to an environmental factor, not an unseen presence. This brought a measure of calm, a logical framework to the odd events. I then checked the housekeeping notes. There was an entry from the evening shift, indicating that the alcove had been cleaned and the cot folded and secured. This confirmed my initial assessment that it should have been undisturbed. The BMS data, however, offered a plausible, non-human explanation. The phantom call button remained an anomaly. I filed a maintenance report for the call system in that empty room, requesting a diagnostic check. The report would be reviewed by the facilities team in the morning. I noted all my observations in the overnight rounding log, detailing the cot incident and the call panel activation, along with my review of the BMS and HVAC data. It was important to document everything, to maintain a clear record of events. The rest of my shift passed without further incident. The hospital remained quiet, the hum of its systems a constant, reassuring presence. The sun began to rise, casting a pale light through the playroom's glass wall, signaling the approach of the day shift. I handed over my report to the incoming nurse, explaining the unusual occurrences. She listened calmly, nodding at the procedural explanations. The maintenance team later found a minor fault in the wiring of the call button in the empty room, a loose connection that could occasionally trigger a false positive in the central panel. It was a rare occurrence, but not impossible. The cot, they confirmed, had no mechanical issues. The BMS data was accepted as the most likely explanation for its movement. I still work the night shift on the pediatric floor. The hospital continues its quiet hum through the long hours. Sometimes, when the building is particularly still, and the air feels especially cold, I hear a faint whisper of air, or a subtle creak from an unseen part of the structure. I know the logical explanations, the BMS logs, the maintenance reports, but in the deep quiet of the night, the memory of that shifting cot and the sound of its fabric scrape still lingers. I was the EVS lead on the overnight shift, performing routine checks. The pediatrics ward was quiet, settled into its deep slumber. A single, motion-activated light had just triggered in a locked supply closet. The hospital at night held a different kind of silence. My duties involved ensuring the cleanliness and order of the entire floor, especially during the quiet hours when most patients and their families were asleep. This particular wing, dedicated to pediatrics, was usually a place of gentle hums and soft beeps. But after midnight, it became almost entirely still. I had just finished sanitizing the playroom's glass wall, the reflections of the dim hallway lights stretching across the polished surface. The central nurse's station was a beacon of soft light, its call panel glowing faintly. My route took me past the family sleep alcoves, each door closed, indicating occupancy. The themed elevator, usually a source of cheerful sounds during the day, stood dormant. I moved with a practiced quietness, my steps barely audible on the linoleum. The air was kept at a consistent, comfortable temperature, a stark contrast to the cold outside. I carried my small flashlight, though the hallway dimmers provided enough ambient light for navigation. The fish tank hallway, with its gentle gurgle, was a familiar landmark. Everything was in its expected place, a predictable rhythm that defined the night shift. The supply closet was located near the far end of the pediatrics wing, tucked away from the main patient rooms. It contained cleaning supplies, spare linens, and various disposable medical items. Access was restricted, requiring a badge swipe for entry. As I approached its door, a soft click echoed from within, followed by the low, steady ballast hum of its fluorescent light. The light spilled out from beneath the door, a thin, bright line against the dark floor. This was the first irregularity. The light should not have been on. My initial thought was that a colleague had entered and forgotten to close the door properly, or perhaps the motion sensor was malfunctioning. I checked my handheld device, which logged all badge entries for the floor. There was no record of anyone accessing that specific closet in the last several hours. The last entry had been during the evening shift, well before I started my rounds. I stood there for a moment, listening to the hum, a quiet sound in the otherwise still hallway. The light remained on, unwavering. I approached the door slowly, my hand resting on the cool metal of the handle. The door was locked as expected. I tried my badge and the lock disengaged with a soft thud. Pushing the door open a few inches, I peered inside. The small closet was empty. Rows of neatly stacked supplies, cleaning carts, and lemon bins were visible. No one was there. The motion sensor, a small white dome mounted high on the wall, glowed faintly, indicating activation. I stepped inside, the light now fully illuminating the space. The hum was louder here, a constant presence. I scanned the shelves, checked behind the carts, even looked up at the ceiling tiles. Nothing. I closed the door and the light remained on for its programmed duration, about a minute before clicking off. The hum faded. I waited for a few minutes, watching the door. It stayed dark. I continued my rounds, but the incident stayed with me. A light without entry. It was a small thing, easily dismissed as a sensor glitch, but it felt out of place. The quiet of the ward seemed to deepen around me. Later that night, as I passed the same closet again, the light triggered once more. The same soft click, the same ballast hum, the same thin line of light beneath the door. This time, I had not approached it directly. I was perhaps 20 feet away, rounding the corner from the fish tank hallway. My badge log still showed no entry. This second occurrence shifted the incident from a minor anomaly to something requiring a closer look. I immediately contacted the night supervisor, filing a preliminary report. The supervisor, a calm and experienced man named Mark, met me at the closet. We reviewed the badge access log together on his tablet. The data was clear. No one had entered the closet. We then checked the security camera footage from the hallway directly facing the closet door. The camera provided a clear view of the entrance. We watched the playback from the time of the first trigger. The hallway was empty. Then, the light beneath the door appeared. No one had walked in or out. The camera confirmed no visible entrant. Mark suggested it might be a draft from the ventilation system, a common issue with older PIR sensors. He called maintenance, and a technician arrived within an hour, carrying a small, handheld thermal imager. The technician opened the ceiling panel inside the closet, revealing the ventilation ductwork. He explained that a strong plume of air, especially if it varied in temperature, could sometimes break the PIR threshold, tricking the sensor into thinking there was movement. He pointed the imager at the vent. A faint, cooler current was indeed detectable, flowing downwards. The technician adjusted the sensitivity of the PIR sensor, hoping to mitigate the issue. He also checked the door's seal, ensuring no significant air currents were passing underneath. We all agreed that the vent plume was the most plausible explanation. It was a logical, procedural solution to an unsettling event. The report was updated, and the incident was officially closed as a false trigger due to environmental factors. I felt a sense of relief. The rational explanation brought back the familiar order of the night shift. However, the quiet dread did not entirely dissipate. Over the next few nights, I found myself paying closer attention to the pediatrics ward. I checked the nurse call system more frequently, ensuring no phantom calls were registered from unused alcoves. I listened for any unusual sounds from the playroom, where battery-removed toys sometimes seemed to chirp faintly in the deep silence. I even rode the themed elevator a few times, just to confirm it opened to an empty car, not an empty playroom. The ward remained still, its systems functioning normally. The supply closet light did not trigger again after the sensor adjustment. The official notes in the maintenance logbook confirmed the vent plume is the cause. The video stills from the security camera, showing an empty hallway at the moment of activation, became part of the incident file. There was no evidence of anything beyond a technical glitch. The cold, hard facts pointed to a simple explanation. Yet, sometimes, when the hospital is particularly quiet and the night stretches long, I still recall the soft click and the low hum. I remember the thin line of light beneath that locked door and the empty hallway on the camera footage. The memory of that light, appearing without entry, remains a quiet whisper in the back of my mind. It was a small, isolated event, but it left a lasting impression. I work as a facilities AV technician, responsible for maintaining the hospital's complex audio-visual and communication infrastructure. My shift often extended into the late hours, performing system checks when patient traffic was minimal and the building settled into its quietest rhythm. This particular night, the pediatric corridor felt especially still, illuminated only by the soft, diffused light spilling from the nurse's station and the gentle glow of nightlights within the family sleep alcoves. The air carried a faint, sterile scent, cool and dry against my skin as I walked the polished linoleum floors. I was making my way towards the central call panel, checking speaker zones, when I first noticed it. A faint, high-pitched chime, almost like a whisper carried on a distant breeze. It was the distinct sound of a nurse call alert, but it was too soft, too distant, and it repeated itself with an unnerving precision. The sound was not loud enough to trigger any of the system's fault indicators on my portable unit. It simply existed, a quiet, rhythmic pulse in the otherwise silent wing. I stopped near the glass wall of the playroom, trying to pinpoint its origin. The room beyond was dark, filled with the silent shapes of play equipment and the muted colors of murals. The chime came again, exactly as before. A single, brief tone, then silence for a full minute before its return. It was an anomaly I had never encountered in my years on the job. My role involves the upkeep of everything from the public address system to the specialized nurse call panels in each room. I handle the intercoms, the patient entertainment units, and the various sensors that monitor activity in sensitive areas. During the overnight hours, the hospital transforms. The bustling daytime energy gives way to a profound quiet, broken only by the hum of machinery and the occasional soft footsteps of staff. This is when I perform preventative maintenance, checking speaker loops, testing call buttons, and ensuring all audio pathways are clear. The pediatric wing in particular has its own unique set of systems. There are motion sensors in the supply closets, specialized call buttons designed for small hands, and even ambient sound systems in the playroom. Parent cot policies meant some family sleep alcoves were occupied, but the general quiet was profound. The large fish tank in the main hallway had its own automated maintenance cycle, a gentle gurgle that was part of the expected background noise. I knew the soundscape of this building intimately. The repeating chime was unlike anything I had logged before. It was not a full, robust nurse call tone, but a faint, almost ghost-like echo of it. The sound had a thin, reedy quality. I began my methodical sweep of the pediatric corridor. I checked the central call panel at the nurse's station first, reviewing its event log. The digital display showed no active calls, no recent alarms, and no system errors. I walked the length of the hallway, pausing at each patient room, listening at the closed doors. The dimmers were set low. No sound emanated from within. The chime continued its precise, minute-long cycle. I moved towards the themed elevator which opened onto the playroom. I pressed the call button, and the doors slid open silently to reveal the empty, darkened space. The elevator itself was quiet. I entered the playroom, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The room was filled with colorful, child-sized furniture and an array of toys. Many of these toys were supposed to have their batteries removed during quiet hours to prevent accidental activation. Yet, as I stood there, a faint, almost imperceptible chirp emanated from a corner. It was a soft electronic sound, like a small battery-operated toy briefly coming to life. I moved towards it, finding a plastic robot on a shelf. Its battery compartment was empty. I picked it up, but it remained silent. The chirp did not repeat. I dismissed it as a residual charge, a common occurrence with some older circuits. But the timing felt unsettling. The nurse call chime continued its steady rhythm, unaffected by my presence. I left the playroom and continued my investigation, moving towards the family sleep alcoves. These small, semi-private areas offered parents a place to rest near their children. Most were dark, their privacy curtains drawn. I passed one alcove that was clearly unused, its cot neatly folded, the space empty. As I walked past, a soft click registered in the air, barely audible. It was the sound of a call button being depressed, a gentle, mechanical action. I stopped, turned, and looked into the alcove. There was no one there. The call button on the wall was flush. I reached out and pressed it myself. The distinct, louder chime of a live nurse call echoed through the corridor, registering on the nurse's station panel. I canceled the call. The faint, repeating chime, however, remained. It was a separate, persistent entity. My focus returned to the audio system. The repeating chime had to be an electrical artifact. I began checking the speaker loops in the ceiling panels. I used my handheld audio probe, moving it slowly along the grid. The sound was strongest near the junction box for the pediatric wing's public address system. This particular system was fed by a central amplifier rack located in the basement. I knew there had been a brief brownout earlier that evening, a momentary dip in power that had caused some systems to reset. It was a common occurrence. I considered the possibility of a latched speaker line, a circuit that had failed to fully disengage after the power fluctuation. This could create a low-level bleed, a faint signal that would not register as a full fault. The sound was consistent, unwavering. It was a technical problem, I told myself. A glitch in the matrix of wires and circuits. Yet, the precise timing, the minute-long interval, and the isolated incidents began to form a pattern that felt less like random chance. I decided to escalate my investigation to a deeper diagnostic level. I retrieved my portable oscilloscope from my cart. This device would allow me to visualize the electrical waveform on the speaker lines, revealing any anomalous signals that were too faint for the standard fault detection. I connected the scope to the main speaker loop junction box in the ceiling. The screen flickered to life, displaying a flat line, indicating no active audio signal. I waited. Precisely on the minute, a tiny spike appeared on the trace. A brief, almost imperceptible blip. It was the nurse call chime, rendered visible as an electrical pulse. The amplitude was incredibly low, barely above the noise floor, but it was undeniably there, repeating with perfect regularity. This confirmed my suspicion of a signal bleed. The next step was to isolate the source. I systematically disconnected speaker zones, one by one, listening for the chime to cease and watching the oscilloscope trace. The sound persisted. This indicated the bleed was occurring upstream, closer to the amplifier itself. I radioed the night supervisor to inform them of the ongoing issue, explaining it as a low-level electrical anomaly. I kept my tone calm and factual, as always. The supervisor acknowledged my report, noting it in the overnight rounding notes. I then made my way down to the basement, to the central equipment room, where the public address amplifiers were housed. The air in the basement was cooler, carrying the scent of ozone and dust. The hum of the server racks and HVAC units was a constant, low thrum. I located the amplifier rack for the pediatric wing. Each amplifier had a series of indicator lights and output meters. All lights were green and the meters showed no active signal. I connected the oscilloscope directly to the output of the main amplifier for the pediatric zone. Again, the screen showed a flat line. I waited, watching the seconds tick by on my watch. Exactly on the minute, the faint spike appeared on the oscilloscope trace. It was identical to the one I had seen upstairs, confirming the amplifier itself was the source of the bleed. This was unusual. Amplifiers are designed to either be on or off, to pass a signal or not. A low-level, repeating bleed like this suggested a component failure, likely triggered by the earlier brownout. The amplifier had not fully recovered. I began the process of bypassing the affected amplifier. This involved rerouting the speaker lines through a backup unit, a standard procedure for critical systems. As I worked, I reviewed the digital event log for the amplifier system. It showed the brownout event, followed by a series of system reboots and self-tests. There was no specific error code indicating a latched output. I also cross-referenced this with past maintenance tickets. There had been no similar reports for this particular amplifier. The issue was unique. The quiet dread I felt was not from fear of a ghost, but from the unsettling precision of the malfunction. It was a machine mimicking a human action, a call for help, repeating endlessly in an empty space. The cold logic of the equipment failure was less comforting than it should have been. I completed the bypass, switching the pediatric speaker loop to the backup amplifier. I then reconnected the oscilloscope to the output of the now isolated primary amplifier. The screen remained flat. The repeating spike was gone. I then went back upstairs to the pediatric corridor. The silence was absolute. The faint chime had finally ceased. I confirmed this with the nurse's station console exports, which now showed no phantom calls. The problem was resolved, technically. I documented the incident thoroughly in my maintenance report. The official notes cited an amplifier recovery issue following a power fluctuation, leading to a low-level signal bleed on the pediatric speaker loop. The oscilloscope capture was attached as evidence, clearly showing the minute-long pulse. The affected amplifier was tagged for repair and replacement. The console exports from the nurse's station confirmed the cessation of the phantom calls immediately after the bypass. The overnight rounding notes from the supervisor also reflected the resolution of the electrical anomaly. Everything was accounted for, filed, and logged. The technical explanation was sound, logical, and complete. Yet, the experience left a subtle, lingering impression. The precise minute-long interval of the chime, the brief chirp from the battery-removed toy, the phantom click of the call button in the empty alcove. These details remained in my mind. They were all explainable as separate minor malfunctions or residual effects, but their convergence felt less like coincidence. I understood the mechanics of the failure, but the pattern of its manifestation felt like a deliberate, quiet plea. The pediatric wing is quiet again during my night shifts. The systems function as they should, the speakers silent unless an announcement is made. I still walk the corridors, checking the equipment, listening to the ambient hum of the building. Sometimes, in the deepest quiet of the night, when the air is still and the lights are low, I find myself listening for that faint, repeating chime. I know it is gone, that the faulty amplifier has been replaced, but the memory of that quiet, persistent sound, repeating its single, soft note in the empty hospital, still resonates. I hear it sometimes, a whisper in the silence. I was on my overnight shift, conducting a routine patrol of the pediatric wing. The hospital was quiet, the air inside cool and still. That night, a faint, rhythmic sound began to emerge from the service stairwell. My partner, Officer Miller, and I were responsible for the hospital's security from late evening until early morning. The pediatric floor, usually bustling, became a place of hushed activity after visiting hours. Our rounds involved checking doors, ensuring patient safety, and responding to any alarms or calls. We knew the building's rhythms well, the subtle hum of its systems, the distant rumble of laundry carts, the occasional static from a forgotten radio. The pediatric wing had a specific layout, a central nurse's station, a playroom with a large glass wall, a themed elevator, and a hallway lined with family sleep alcoves. There were also closed exam rooms under dimmers and a supply closet with a motion-activated light. We walked these halls countless times, noting every detail. The sound started subtly, a soft, almost imperceptible tick. It seemed to come from the service stairwell, a concrete and metal structure running adjacent to the pediatric floor. At first, I dismissed it as the building settling, or perhaps a distant maintenance crew. The hospital was an old structure, constantly undergoing repairs and upgrades. The tick became more distinct over the next few nights. It sounded like a footstep, light and deliberate, ascending the metal stairs. Each step had a metallic resonance, a faint echo that seemed to linger in the cold air of the stairwell. We checked the stairwell access logs. No one was scheduled to be there during those hours. No one had used their badge to enter or exit. Miller and I began to pay closer attention. We would pause near the stairwell door, listening. The steps were always the same, a measured cadence, slow and steady. They would ascend a few flights, then stop. There was never a descent. We tried to catch the source. One night, as the sound began, Miller took the elevator to the floor above, while I waited below. He opened the stairwell door on his floor. I opened it on mine. We stood there, listening. The steps continued, moving between us. We saw nothing. The stairwell was empty, its concrete walls and metal railings reflecting only the dim emergency lighting. The air was always a little colder in there, carrying a faint metallic scent. The incident reports began to accumulate. We documented each occurrence, noting the approximate time and duration. The sound was consistent, always starting around midnight, sometimes continuing for an hour or more. It was never frantic, never hurried, just those slow, deliberate steps. We checked the security cameras covering the stairwell entrances on various floors. The footage showed no one entering or exiting. The doors remained closed. We even tried to time our approach, rushing to the stairwell as soon as the sound began. We would find nothing but silence, the lingering chill, and the faint hum of the building's ventilation system. The experience was unsettling. It was not a loud, startling noise, but a persistent, quiet presence that defied explanation. The lack of a visible source, combined with the regularity of the sound, created a quiet dread. We were trained to find logical explanations, to identify threats, but this was different. It felt like an observation, not an intrusion. The pediatric floor itself had its own set of peculiar occurrences. Call buttons would sometimes activate in an unused alcove. Battery-removed toys in the playroom would occasionally emit faint chirps. The themed elevator, designed to look like a rocket ship, would sometimes open its doors to an empty playroom, its internal lights flickering. These incidents were usually dismissed as electrical glitches or residual power. However, when paired with the stairwell sounds, they began to form a pattern of subtle, inexplicable events. We started to cross-reference our incident reports with the hospital's building management system, or BMS, looking for any correlations. We checked the HVAC schedules, the power fluctuations, anything that might explain the anomalies. The BMS logs showed nothing unusual. Everything appeared to be operating within normal parameters. The steps continued, night after night. They became a part of the quiet hours, an expected, yet always unsettling presence. We started to refer to it as the stair echo. It wasn't truly an echo, as there was no initial sound to bounce. It was the sound itself, seemingly originating from nowhere. The hospital's maintenance team was called in. They checked the structural integrity of the stairwell, looking for loose panels or vibrating pipes. They found nothing. The stairwell was deemed structurally sound, its components secure. We even had them check the ventilation shafts that ran alongside the stairwell, thinking perhaps a draft or a loose damper was creating the illusion of movement. Again, nothing. The mystery deepened, becoming a quiet obsession for Miller and me. We would discuss it during our breaks, poring over the logbook entries, trying to find a detail we had missed. Our supervisor, Lieutenant Davies, took a personal interest in the reports. He understood the need for a definitive explanation, especially in a hospital environment where patient and staff comfort was paramount. He authorized the deployment of specialized equipment. We installed paired microphones at different points within the stairwell, carefully calibrated to capture and triangulate any sound. These microphones were linked to a dedicated audio logging system, designed to record and analyze even the faintest acoustic signatures. The data collected was extensive, a continuous stream of ambient noise and the distinct metallic ticks. We also began to meticulously track the hospital's HVAC system, specifically the fan schedules and ramp curves for the ventilation units serving that section of the building. We knew the building had a complex system of air handlers and exhaust fans, constantly adjusting to maintain temperature and air quality. The analysis took several weeks. The audio logs were cross-referenced with the BMS trend data. What emerged was a subtle but undeniable correlation. The footsteps were not footsteps at all. They were a specific type of resonance, a sympathetic vibration. The paired microphones, with their precise timing, revealed that the metallic tick of the steps perfectly mapped to the intermittent chatter of fan shutters within the HVAC system. These shutters, designed to regulate airflow, would open and close with a distinct metallic snap. The sound was faint, almost imperceptible in the open areas of the hospital. However, within the enclosed concrete and metal environment of the service stairwell, the sound was amplified and distorted. The stairwell acted as a resonant chamber, transforming the sharp, quick chatter of the shutters into a slower, more deliberate-sounding impact. The echo effect was not an echo in the traditional sense, but a product of the stairwell's acoustics. The sound waves from the fan shutters would travel through the ventilation ducts, then resonate within the stairwell itself. The timing of the steps aligned precisely with the HVAC ramp curves, the periods when the ventilation units were cycling up or down, causing the shutters to open and close. The low rush of the air moving through the system, combined with the metal tick of the shutters, created the illusion of movement. It was a complex interplay of sound, structure, and air pressure. The resolution was purely mechanical, a testament to the building's intricate systems and the way sound behaves in specific environments. The official report detailed the findings. The stair echo was attributed to HVAC system resonance within the service stairwell, exacerbated by specific acoustic properties of the structure. Maintenance adjusted the fan shutter mechanisms, adding dampeners to reduce the metallic chatter. The sound gradually faded, becoming an infrequent, almost inaudible whisper. The incident was logged, filed, and closed. We had our explanation, a logical, procedural resolution. Yet, the memory of those nights, the quiet dread of the unseen presence remained. We had spent weeks listening to something that wasn't there, something that sounded so real. Even now, on quiet nights, when the hospital settles into its deep hum, I sometimes catch myself listening. I listen for that faint metallic tick, that slow, deliberate ascent. The sound is gone, but the memory of its presence, the feeling of something moving in the cold, empty stairwell, still lingers. I was on my usual overnight rounds in the pediatrics wing. The air was cool, the hallways mostly dark. A few hours past midnight. That night, a sound came from the main elevator lobby, something I had not heard before. My job as a night facilities technician involved monitoring the hospital's infrastructure, ensuring everything ran smoothly during the quiet hours. This included the elevators, the HVAC systems, and the various call systems that kept the building operational. The pediatrics wing especially required a gentle touch. Most of the lights were dimmed, and the only sounds were the distant hum of machinery and the occasional soft chime from a nurse call panel. The main elevator in this section was themed for children, painted with bright, friendly animals. It usually sat silent, its internal fan providing a low, constant hum that was easy to ignore. The lobby itself was a quiet space, leading to the playroom with its large glass wall and the fish tank hallway. I had just completed a check of the central call panel at the nurse's station, confirming no active alerts. The dim light from the station cast long shadows down the hallway. The air felt still, carrying the faint, clean scent of hospital disinfectant. My boots made soft, almost imperceptible sounds on the polished linoleum. I was heading towards the supply closet to check its motion-activated light when the sound occurred. It was a clear, synthesized female voice emanating from the elevator speaker. The voice announced, "Doors closing, going up, floor 3. The words hung in the quiet air. I stopped, my hand still on the doorframe of an unused exam room. The elevator car itself remained perfectly still. There was no soft whir of the motor, no gentle lurch of the car beginning its ascent. The doors were already closed, as they had been for the past hour. I stood there for a moment, listening. The fan hum from the elevator was the only other sound. The voice had been distinct, almost too clear for the late hour. It was the kind of announcement that usually accompanied the physical movement of the car, a standard safety feature. But there had been no movement. I walked slowly towards the elevator lobby, my eyes fixed on the floor indicator panel. It showed the car resting on the ground floor, where it had been for some time. I pressed the call button for the elevator. The button lit up with a soft glow, acknowledging my request. I waited, listening intently. The car did not respond. No sound of gears engaging, no sense of the cables tightening. After a few minutes, the light on the call button extinguished itself, indicating a timeout. The elevator remained motionless. The quiet of the hallway returned, heavier now. I checked the adjacent family sleep alcoves, ensuring no one had inadvertently triggered a call. They were all dark and still. The playroom, visible through its glass wall, was empty, its colorful toys neatly arranged and silent. Even the fish in the large tank in the hallway seemed to be resting, their movements minimal. I considered the possibility of a prank, but the wing was secured, and I had seen no one else. The isolation of the night shift could sometimes play tricks on the mind. But this sound had been too real, too precise. I decided to investigate further. My first step was to access the elevator's controller panel, located in a small utility room nearby. I retrieved my master key and opened the heavy metal door. Inside, the room was filled with the low hum of electrical equipment. Rows of circuit boards and relays glowed with small indicator lights. I connected my portable diagnostic unit to the controller. The unit began to download the elevator's event history log. This log recorded every command, every movement, every door cycle. I scrolled through the entries for the past few hours. There were no records of the car moving, no registered calls, no door cycles. The log confirmed the elevator had been idle, just as I had observed. As I reviewed the data, the voice came again. This time it was fainter, almost a whisper, but still discernible. Doors closing, going up, floor 3. I looked up from the diagnostic unit, my gaze sweeping across the controller panel. Nothing seemed out of place. No error lights were illuminated. The car remained at the ground floor, according to the panel's display. The sound seemed to emanate directly from the lobby, not from the utility room's internal speaker. I quickly disconnected my unit and returned to the lobby. The silence was absolute once more. This second occurrence, while I was actively monitoring the system, solidified the incident. It was not a trick of the mind. I returned to the utility room and reconnected my diagnostic unit. I focused on the audio line, checking for any anomalies. The system was designed to play these announcements only when specific conditions were met. A call registered, doors closing, and car movement initiated. The absence of these conditions, coupled with the audio output, was a clear deviation from normal operation. I initiated a full system diagnostic, running through every sensor and relay. The results came back clean. No faults detected. I then checked the line monitor for the audio system. It showed a brief, almost imperceptible voltage dip, coinciding precisely with the moments the voice had spoken. This was a potential lead. A momentary drop in power could, in theory, trigger a specific component without initiating the full sequence of operations. It was a rare occurrence, but plausible. I made a note of the exact times of the voltage dips. I also checked the building's main power grid logs, confirming minor fluctuations around those times, consistent with the dips I observed on the audio line. My investigation expanded. I checked the motion sensors in the playroom and the supply closet, ensuring they weren't somehow interfering with the elevator's systems. All were functioning normally, showing no activity. I reviewed the nurse call topology, looking for any crosstalk or phantom signals that might be misinterpreting a call. Nothing. I even considered the fish tank maintenance cycle, which sometimes involved pumps and filters that could create minor electrical interference. But its schedule was not aligned with the incidents. The logical explanation pointed to a voltage dip, a brief static burst on the audio line, causing the announcement to play without the car moving. It was a technical glitch, an isolated anomaly. Yet, the quiet dread remained. The voice had been so clear, so specific. I spent the rest of the night monitoring the elevator, but the voice did not return. The silence was punctuated only by the constant hum of the hospital. I completed my rounds, checking the closed exam rooms under their dimmers, ensuring all systems were stable. The cold air in the hallways seemed to carry a new weight. I filed a detailed report, outlining my observations and the technical data from the controller and line monitor. The console exports were attached as evidence. A maintenance ticket was opened for the elevator, requesting a thorough inspection of the audio system and power supply. The logbook entry was precise, factual, and devoid of any personal interpretation. The official conclusion, after a few days, aligned with my initial assessment. The elevator maintenance team found no mechanical faults. They attributed the incident to a rare combination of minor voltage fluctuations and a sensitive audio relay. The system was deemed safe, and no further action was required beyond a routine check. The incident was filed away, a minor anomaly in the hospital's operational history. Despite the technical explanation, the memory of that voice lingers. I still work the night shift, and the pediatrics wing remains one of my regular patrols. Sometimes, in the deep quiet of the early morning, I find myself pausing near that elevator lobby, listening intently. I still hear it sometimes, not with my ears, but in the quiet space behind them. The clear, calm announcement of a floor that was never reached, a journey that never began. I was the charge nurse on the pediatric floor, overseeing the quiet hours of the night shift. The air in the long corridors felt cool, a steady hum from the ventilation system the only constant sound. It was during these deep night hours that the first unusual call began to register on the central panel. My routine involved meticulous checks and careful documentation. The pediatric ward, even at night, required constant vigilance. I would move through the dimly lit hallways, past the glass wall of the playroom, checking on sleeping children and ensuring all equipment functioned correctly. The fish tank hallway, with its soft, bubbling light, offered a brief, calming distraction before I continued my rounds to the family sleep alcoves. Each night was a predictable cycle of quiet tasks and occasional urgent needs. The first time it happened, I was at the nurse's station, reviewing a patient's chart. The call panel, a large console with an array of room numbers, suddenly illuminated. Room 314 flashed a soft amber, accompanied by a brief, gentle chime. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It was about 2/3 of the way through the hour. I knew room 314 was empty, undergoing a deep clean before a new admission. I cleared the call, assuming a stray dust particle or a minor system glitch. The panel went dark, and I returned to my notes. About an hour later, the chime sounded again. Room 314. The same soft, amber light. I checked the clock again. It was precisely the same moment in the hour as before. This time, a faint hum seemed to emanate from the panel itself. A low, almost imperceptible vibration. I walked down the corridor to room 314. The door was closed, the room dark. I opened it slowly. The air inside was cool and still, smelling faintly of disinfectant. There was nothing out of place. No one was there. The bed was stripped, awaiting fresh linens. I pressed the call plate inside the room, confirming it was functional, then cleared the call from the panel once more. The pattern solidified over the next few nights. Every hour, at that specific moment, room 314 would register a call. It was never a patient call, which had a distinct, more urgent tone. This was always the gentle, almost apologetic chime of a routine call plate activation. I began to anticipate it. I would be at the station, preparing a report, and a few minutes before the expected time, a subtle tension would build. Then the chime, the amber light, the faint hum. I started keeping a logbook of these incidents, noting the exact time in my observations. One night, as I approached the supply closet near the playroom, the motion-activated light flickered on. Inside, a cleaning cart sat parked, its large battery charger plugged into an outlet. A low, steady hum emanated from the charger unit. I had noticed it before, a common sound on the ward. But this time, it seemed more pronounced. I continued my rounds, checking the closed exam rooms, their dimmers set low for the night. The themed elevator, usually quiet, opened once to an empty playroom, its glass wall reflecting the hallway lights. There was no one inside, no one waiting. The battery-removed toys in the playroom, usually silent, seemed to emit a faint, almost imperceptible static, a whisper of sound that I dismissed as my imagination. The recurring call from room 314 became a quiet obsession. I began to correlate the timing with other events. The cleaning cart, I realized, was often plugged in around the same time each night, usually by the evening shift before they left. Its charger would remain plugged in, humming throughout my shift. I started to wonder if there was a connection. The call system was robust, designed for reliability, but I knew that electromagnetic interference could sometimes cause unpredictable behavior in sensitive electronics. During one of these hourly incidents, I was standing directly in front of the call panel. The chime sounded. The light came on. I could feel a faint vibration in the console's metal casing. I walked over to the supply closet. The cleaning cart charger was indeed plugged in, its hum distinct in the quiet night. I unplugged it. The hum ceased. I returned to the nurse's station. The call from room 314 was still active on the panel. I cleared it. I waited. The next hour passed without incident. The specific moment came and went, and the panel remained dark. I plugged the charger back in. Within an hour, the call from room 314 registered again, precisely at the expected moment. The pattern was undeniable. The charger, when active, seemed to induce a phantom signal in the call system, specifically affecting room 314. It was a strange, almost unsettling discovery. The call plates, designed to sense a physical press, were somehow being nudged by an unseen force. A pulse of energy traveling through the building's electrical circuits. I documented my findings meticulously in the logbook, detailing the charger's location, the exact timing of the calls, and the effect of unplugging the unit. I submitted a maintenance ticket, attaching my notes and observations. The next morning, the facilities team investigated. They found that the charger, an older model, was indeed emitting a significant amount of electromagnetic interference. The wiring for room 314's call plate ran unusually close to a main power conduit that was susceptible to this specific frequency. The EMI was strong enough to trigger the plate's sensor, mimicking a physical press. The maintenance team replaced the old charger with a newer, shielded model. They also rerouted the call plate wiring for room 314, adding extra shielding. The ghost calls stopped immediately. The central call panel remained dark and silent, except for legitimate patient needs. The hum from the supply closet was gone. The quiet dread that had settled over my nights began to dissipate. I still review the console exports from time to time, looking for any anomalies. The maintenance file contains my original report and the technician's notes. It is a strange piece of evidence in the hospital's logbook. A procedural explanation for what felt, for a time, like something else entirely. The memory of that brief chime, always at the same time, still lingers in the quiet of the night. It was a small, persistent sound, a whisper of an unseen presence in an empty room. I sometimes wonder what other unseen forces hum beneath the surface of our everyday world.